lesson. In this video, we continue by looking at the operating system. Specifically, we are going to look at kernel and user space. Later on, we're going to look at the boot process and how to install an operating system. So in this video today, we are going to look at kernel and user space, and later on we shall look at the boot process, and we shall conclude with how to install an operating system. Okay, so to start with, we're dealing with the operating system. Okay, so we are going to start by looking at the kernel and user space. Okay, so we'll start by looking at the kernel and user space. Okay, so we are going to look at kernel and user space. Now, what is kernel? Okay, or what is user space? Okay, so an operating system of what we call kernel. An operating system of kernel. So kernel is a core component. Okay, so kernel is a core component that interacts directly with the hardware. Kernel is a core component that interacts directly with the hardware. Okay, and then the user space contains user applications and library. The user space contains user applications and library. Remember, there are two types of library in an operating system. We have a static library and a dynamic library. So you can also create a program by the use of a static library. You can also create a program by the use of dynamic library. You can also create a program by the use of both static and dynamic. Okay, so again, kernel and user space are very much important. They are very much important and they are isolated. Kernel and user space are isolated in a computer because they ensure security and stability. So kernel and user space are isolated to ensure security and stability. Okay, so an operating system of kernel. Most of the operating system have kernel. Okay, so kernel is able to interact with the hardware directly. Kernel is able to interact with the hardware directly, and then the user space contains user applications and libraries. So both kernel and user space are isolated to ensure security and stability. Okay, so we are talking about kernel. We are saying that the first step is the operating system. Okay, so the operating system of kernel. Okay, the operating system of kernel. So the core component. Okay, so the core component that can, okay, so the core component that can interact. Okay, so the core components that can interact directly with the hardware. Okay. Okay, so we are saying that kernel, the operating system have got kernel. So the core component that can interact directly with the hardware. So kernel can interact directly with the hardware. Okay, and then when you talk of user space, okay, so when you talk of user space, so user space contains user applications. User space contains user applications and libraries. Okay, user space contains user applications and libraries. And remember, when it comes to library, an operating system has got two libraries. There is a static library and a dynamic library. So you can both create a program by the use of static library and also by the use of dynamic library. Okay, again we said that both kernel, we said that both kernel and user space, both kernel and user space are isolated. Okay, so both kernel and user space are isolated to ensure stability and security. So they are isolated. Okay, so both kernel and user space are isolated to ensure stability and security. Okay, so these are just few things about kernel and user space. So the operating system have kernel, the core components that interact directly with the hardware, and then the user space contains user applications and libraries. Kernel and user space are isolated to ensure stability and security. Okay, so let us also proceed by looking at the boot system. Let us also proceed by looking at the boot system. Okay, we look at the boot system or the boot process. Okay, so let us also proceed by looking at the boot process or the boot system. Okay, so we proceed by looking at the boot process. Okay, so let us proceed by looking at the boot. Okay, the boot process. Okay, so we proceed by looking at the boot process. Now, when we look at the boot process, or when you talk about the boot process, okay, we are talking about the boot process where the computer is on. So if a computer is powered on, the BIOS or the Unified Extensive Firmware Interface, they initialize hardware and load a load booster. Okay, so what we're saying is that when the computer is powered on, the BIOS or the Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, they initialize the hardware. Okay, so they initialize the hardware and loads the bootloader. Okay, so after loading the bootloader of an operating system, the bootloader will load a kernel. Okay, so it will load a kernel in a memory. After loading a kernel in a memory, the operating system then it will start learning. Okay, so what we're trying to say is that what will happen is that when the computer is powered on, what will happen is that the BIOS, okay, so what will happen is that the BIOS or the unified, okay, so the BIOS or unified expensive firmware interface, they will initialize the hardware and they will load the bootloader. Okay, so what is going to happen is that the BIOS and the UEFI, they will load the bootloader. Okay, so they will load the bootloader. Okay, and then later on, the bootloader will load the kernel. Okay, so later on, the bootloader will load the kernel. So it will load the kernel into the memory. Okay, so it will load the kernel into the memory, and then what will happen is that now the operating system will start learning through the computer. Now you can officially use the computer. So now you expect the operating system to start learning. Okay, so the operating system to start learning, okay, through the computer. So the first thing here under the boot process is that when a computer is powered on, the BIOS, okay, let us also first understand what is a BIOS. BIOS means basic input stroke output system. So basic input stroke output system will load the bootloader. Okay, it will load the bootloader. It will initialize the hardware to load a bootloader. So this BIOS, let's say for example, you have seen it before, an example of a BIOS within a computer. What example? An example of a BIOS within a computer. So an example of a BIOS within a computer is, you have seen it before, maybe before seeing the window box. Before you can see the window box on your computer, you are able to see little command line where it will tell you to say place F1, F2, F4, ESC. All those are examples of a BIOS. Okay, so examples of BIOS, you can say, okay, F1, F2, F4, up to F12, or ESC. So F1, F2, F4, up to F12 or ESC. These are examples of a BIOS. Okay, so those are examples of a BIOS. When a computer is turned on, you're going to see some, it will tell you to say place F1, that is F1, it initialize. So the moment you press F1 to boot your computer, the moment you press F1 to boot your computer, you are initializing. Okay, so you initialize the hardware. So the moment you put you place either F1 or F12 or F5, you are initializing the hardware. And when you initialize the hardware, it will load a bootloader. Okay, and then so when you load the bootloader will load the operating system kernel. Okay, the bootloader will load the operating system kernel, okay, into a memory. So the operating system kernel will be loaded in a memory. So when it is loaded in a memory, now the operating system will run in a computer and it is ready to be used. Okay, and it is ready to be used. Now I mentioned about two things here. I mentioned about the BIOS, and I also mentioned about the unified extensible farewell interface. Now, when you look at these two, when you look at the BIOS and unified extensible firmware interface, these are two microprocessor. Okay, these are two microprocessor part of a motherboard. Okay, so these are two startup part of a motherboard. Okay, so if you want to start up your computer, it needs to interact with the BIOS or the unified extensible firmware interface. Okay, so this enables the startup of a computer. Very important. Okay, so we say that this U means unified, and then this E means extensible, and then this F means firmware, and then this I means interface. So the BIOS and unified extensive firmware interface enables the startup of a computer. Okay, so as you're starting up a computer, meaning you are initializing the hardware to load a bootloader, and then the bootloader will load the operating system kernel into a memory, and then the computer now, the operating system can now run properly without a problem. Okay, are we together? That is just about the boot process. That is just about the boot process. This is the reason why we always say that an operating system is very much important in a computer. It makes the computer run conveniently, effectively, and also ability to evolve. Okay, definitely. As the definition of an operating system, it is able to act as an interface between the user and the computer hardware. Now let us also proceed by how you can install an operating system by using a flash. How you can install an operating system by using a flash. Okay, we proceed in those directions. Let us also proceed in those directions. Okay, so how to install an operating system? Okay, how to install an operating system using the flash. using the flash drive. Okay, using the flash drive. Okay, so how to install an operating system using the flash drive. Okay, so what you are supposed to do if you want to install an operating system using a flash drive. Okay, so it depends if the computer is new, it depends if the computer is old. Let's say in an instance where the computer is old, maybe the only thing that you're supposed to do is to upgrade your operating system. You can upgrade your operating system, also very important. And then the other part, if the computer, if the computer is new and it doesn't have an operating system, you can also uninstall the old operating system. You uninstall it, the old operating system, and then you put the new one. Okay. Now, before putting the new operating system, that is if you're dealing with an old machine that had an operating system already. So the only thing that you're supposed to do is you uninstall the old operating system if it's not working properly, and then you want to put a new one, you uninstall it, and then you want to install a new one. The first thing that you're supposed to do is you have to petition the files. You have to petition the documents that you have in your computer. You have to petition the files and the documents that you have in your computer so that you don't lose any information. So you have to petition it, you have to back it up. Okay, there are stages where you're supposed to choose, do you want us to keep your files and the documents? Definitely that's what you want. You need to click on that, and then also it will ask you, do you want all your information to be lost or to be deleted? There are such also instruction. Okay, that is if you're just dealing with the old computer. Now, if you are dealing with a new computer and you want to install the operating system using a flash drive, so the first thing that you're supposed to do is to make the flash drive bootable. You need to make the flash drive bootable. Now, how can you make the flash drive bootable? So you make the flash drive bootable by downloading an open source code Lufasi. So you need to download Lufasi. Okay, so this is just an open source code. So you need to download Lufasi, and then the moment you download Lufasi, you can actually put the Lufasi in an operating system by making it bootable, and then you put an operating system in there. So now the operating system should not be put outside because you find that you have put Lufasi, you've made your flash drive bootable, you have put Lufasi in it, and then the operating system again in it, and then the moment you try to insert it on a port of that new computer, nothing is happening. Okay, it can be that the operating system is outside. Okay, it can be that the operating system is outside. So you need to put the operating system and Lufasi in one file. Okay, so that as you inject it on a port, it should be able to respond by bringing the Microsoft box, and then it will ask you whatever is needed, and then you definitely start booting it. It doesn't even take a lot of time. You just need to wait maybe for 20-30 minutes, then you are done, just like that. Okay, just like that. You don't have to take a lot of time when doing that way. You be done by, just in the less than of 30 minutes, you are done installing the operating system. Okay guys, thank you for enjoying this video. Thank you for your time, and make sure don't miss for the next video. Thank you. Enjoy the day.